So hi everyone. I'm going to talk to you about DORA Core. What's that? I'm going to tell you. First off, who's this guy? My name is Dave Stanke. I'm a developer advocate with DORA, which is a program run by Google Cloud. I have a history in various roles. I've been a technical type. I've been a product manager. I've been to school a few times, and I continue to like to learn and to share what I learn with communities like this one. And I play bass badly. I make banana bread pretty well, and I father my children good enough, I guess. Thank you for having me here in DevOps Days Detroit. This is my first time in Detroit, and so far it's a wonderful city, and y'all are wonderful people. And is my pandering working? Am I? All right. So, show of hands, who's heard of DORA before today? We're not talking about a explorer. Well, in a sense we are, but not a cartoon. We're not talking about the European, Data Privacy Act. So cool, I saw a lot of hands. We have something for you in this talk. Who never heard of DORA before today? Fantastic. I have even more for you in this talk. So let's get into it. DORA is a research program. We've been going since 2014 and became part of Google Cloud in 2018. And we're made up of kind of two sets of people. There are researchers who have PhDs and R notebooks. And then there's advocates like myself who have loud mouths and slide decks. And together, we work together, we study engineers and other technical practitioners to understand how people work and how it's going for them. And then we share what we've learned through the community to help advance our understanding collectively of how to get better at building software. We take a scientific approach. I want to tell you a little bit about the science that we use. The first thing we do, of course, is collect data, which we do anonymously and broadly. Since 2014, over 36,000 professionals participated all across the world. And we send out an annual survey. And in that survey, we ask a lot of questions. Questions like these. This is just a small subset of some of the questions we ask. And they include a lot of things about tools, a lot of things about process, a lot of things about culture and attitudes, things about organizations, things about the outcomes that people get. We do our best to de-jargon it. So, for example, you won't hear us ask, do you practice SRE? We talk a lot about operations in our work, but we don't ask, do you do SRE? Instead, we say, do you have symptom-oriented metrics that are kind of like maybe an SLO? Or we won't ask, do you use the Kubernetes? But we may ask about the flexibility of your runtime. And we learn from that, and we learn what kind of impacts that has on your ability to deliver great work to your end users. Then we take all of the data that we get from all of this, and we crunch it up through analytical models based on behavioral research. And we use a modeling methodology that allows us to create a predictive model. So that word predictive is important. It's stronger than simply a correlation, but it's not quite the same as saying a causation. That's pretty deterministic. But what it does say is that based on our research, we can assert that the water flows one direction, if you will. This is the analogy that our researchers love to use. The water flows through the pipes in one direction. If you do a certain thing, it is more likely that something else is going to come out of it. So that's our predictive analysis. And then based on a number of these kinds of pathways, we assemble something called a structural equation model. So this is a whole bunch of those entities and how they relate to one another. All of these are predictive relationships that tell you what kinds of influence each item has on the other items. We sum all of that up and we put together an annual report. The latest one just came out a couple weeks ago, State of DevOps Report 2023. You can download it at dora.dev/report. It's like 100 pages. It's really good 100 pages, but maybe you don't have time for all of that. So I'm here to talk about how we can get a lighter introduction to this research, a good place to start if you're not ready to dive in to a 100-page report. Now, over the years, there have been some consistent themes that have come up through our research. One of them is software delivery performance can be measured, and we have 4 key metrics that we use to measure it. When people talk about DORA, this is the most frequent thing that people know about our work, is these 4 key metrics of software delivery. We have found consistently that software delivery, as measured by these 4 key measures, is predictive of organizational success and of well-being of the people in the system. So these 4 key metrics have been adopted by a lot of organizations. You heard that VMware has reflections of these in the product. You'll meet a lot of organizations that have dashboards or surveys that they use to assess their own performance on these 4 key metrics. We assess these at a team level, not an individual level. And we like to say that they're best for self-improvement. They're best for taking stock of how you're doing and getting a sense for what kinds of things might I try? How might I experiment with the way I do my work? And if it helps these 4 key metrics, that's a good signal that it's going to be good for our overall software delivery. The 4 key metrics are 2 for velocity and 2 for stability. Velocity are lead time for changes. How long does it take us to get code from committed to deployed? Deployment frequency. How frequently are we doing that, releasing new changes to users? Change failure rate. How often, when we do deploy something, do we say, oops, and need to fix it? I use a little saltier language myself, but I assume that you all keep it PG. And then when that does happen, how long does it take us, on average, to restore from that, a failed change recovery time? Taken together, these are predictors of our value that we're delivering to the business. We also have studied organizational performance and employee well-being. These are the outcomes, and found the dynamics that influence those. We've looked a lot at culture over the years. We use a model called the Westrom Cultural Typology, developed by a sociologist named Ron Westrom, that shows that a culture that's got high psychological safety, where information is freely shared and people are collaborative, that's predictive of good outcomes. And we have a catalog of technical and process capabilities that we've developed over the years to talk about ways of working, tools, process, and culture that are predictive of success. A lot of what we see in there adds up to a very simple finding. Small batches are better than large batches. We obviously were influenced by lean manufacturing, and our research has validated a lot of what we in the DevOps community know. Small batches are better than big batches. There's also been some not so consistent things. This is science, and stuff changes. So over the years, we've evaluated lots and lots of different special topics. Through the years, we've looked at security. We've looked at product development. We've looked at things like reliability. We used to call it availability, but then we recognized that reliability is a more inclusive term for that. Recently, we've been doing deep dives into documentation. So every year, we go into down different corridors and find different things. And of course, it's science. So every year, the data is going to be what it's going to be. We don't tell the data what to be. We listen to it. So the truth is, that wasn't the SEM, that was an SEM. This happens to be the one from 2022. This is a diagram of how the pieces fit together that year. And so when we look back through all of the years, what we find is that what science says isn't just one thing. Science over the years has said this, and it has said this, and it has said this, and then this. Most recently, it said this. This is from 2023. This is actually just one of many SEMs from 2023. So there's a lot here, and it's a lot to unpack and make sense of. So thanks, science. But what do we do with all that? Science tells us a lot of things, and it might even tell us things that contradict the other things. What we wish science would say is this: do this one thing. That's it. You're done. Good job. You did a science. It doesn't work that way. But maybe we can get a little closer. So what we need is some way to connect that raw science to the practitioner, something that we can make use of in our day-to-day practice, something that's not going to change every year, right? If I come to you tomorrow with a brand new 100-page report and say, well, here's the new stuff, go change everything you're doing. That's not very practical in an organization where you're trying to make plans over the course of years and trying to change culture and change attitudes, which are slow to change. I think we all know that. So what could we add that would connect science to these practitioners that allows us to really have a firm ground that we can stand on year over year based on the science, but not changing as rapidly as the science might? Well, there's a model we can adapt here. In medicine, We have something like the American Medical Association or other type of institutions around the world. And the job of the AMA is to listen closely to the science and then publish guidelines, right? So, there is new medical science coming out every day. And a lot of times the thing that you thought was totally good for you is totally bad for you, and vice versa. And yet your doctor doesn't immediately say, stop doing that and put everything in this new drug. The AMA provides these guidelines and they evolve more slowly than the state of the art in the science. What can we do in our community that's similar? Well, DORA Core is our answer to that. DORA Core is a collection of the research. It's a summed up version of the research across many years that is meant to be used as a guide in your practitioner context. And the rule for DORA Core is that A, we've studied it more than once. We have at least 2 rounds of validation that this finding is kind of truthful. And the other one is that it's useful in practitioner contexts, that we've learned from our community that this is valuable to you. So, there's some wiggle room there as well. That first one is a non-negotiable. It's got to be at least twice. But some things, maybe we've looked at them a few times, but no one was making that much use of it. So we want it to be practical as well. When something meets that bar, we bring it into Core, and then we bring it out to you as the practitioners to say, go and try using this. We think there's a good hunch that it'll be helpful to your team and your organization. Here's how we made it. So we start by grabbing all of those outcomes, all of those stems, kind of stacking them on top of each other, and then you kind of defocus your eyes and let them all smush up against each other, and we arrive at this. So here it is. This is the DORA Core model. We introduced this year, and this is version 1. It will evolve through the years, but it's going to evolve much more slowly than the data itself, than the research itself. So you can use this as a guide. Bring this to your stakeholders. Bring this to your CEO. Bring this to your product management partners and say, we think there's some stuff in here that's worth trying. Now, actually, I want to start by zooming way in on the top right. What you see up here at the top right is a summary of a summary, if you will. Capabilities predict performance, predicts outcomes, right? And actually the way to work on that is usually from the right to the left. If we've got stakeholders, and we all have stakeholders, our stakeholders want something tangible. They want organizational performance. Maybe they want well-being for the health and safety of the people in their organization. To get those outcomes, what are we going to do? Well, it turns out that software delivery performance is predictive of those outcomes. We've found that repeatedly through our research. Okay, great. So that's those 4 key metrics that we talked about. We can measure those and we can optimize for them. How do we achieve that? Well, that is the whole breadth of the DORA research, looking at the capabilities. And so those capabilities are the pathway to performance according to the 4 key metrics. So zooming back out, we can use this as a guide for experimentation. We all know that we want those things on the right. We know that we can measure our progress toward them using the software delivery performance, the metrics in green. In order to get that, the things that we can try improving are all of those bubbles on the left. Every one of these we've shown in our research to be predictive of that performance. It's a combination of technical, cultural, and process capabilities. And we apply the theory of constraints to how we look at this. So, theory of constraints says that if you make an improvement anywhere other than your bottleneck, it is not going to give you important results, right? Because unless you clear through that bottleneck, the rest of it can flow as fast as it wants. So what we want to do is using this diagram as a guide, we can look at what might be the thing holding me back right now. So we know that a lot of paths lead through continuous delivery, and this relates exactly to that, that small change batches, working in small batches is very much a prerequisite really for continuous delivery, for doing it effectively. And so if I want continuous delivery, then I can move further back and I can look at the technical processes, technical capabilities that are going to affect that. And each one of these things is something that is worth me taking time to do an experiment. We don't know. We at DORA don't know what's going to be most effective in your organization. Context matters, and your context is so specific. But we do know that in aggregate, these things have been found to be valuable. which is why we encourage you to try one of them today and learn from it. And the 4 key metrics, which a lot of you may already be taking advantage of, are a great way to validate that experiment. If I want to try a new way of doing test automation, how do I know if that helped me or didn't? Well, what was the effect on my 4 key metrics? Positive, negative. What was the effect on our well-being? What was the effect on toil and burnout? All of these things are important. And then if that made it, an improvement, do it again, share with your colleagues. If it wasn't so good, hey, we learned from it and let's move on and do something else. You can find this diagram at dora.dev/research. And it's an interactive diagram. So each one of these bubbles you can click on and you will find for each one a brief description of what it is. But more importantly, you can then click from there into our capability catalog. In our capability catalog, you're going to find a description of what is this thing that we have learned is valuable? How do we start doing it? And how do we measure progress? Every one of them has its own measurements, its own metrics that we can lean on. And every one of them is something that there's a wide, broad body of research. You'll also find lots of links to other resources, a lot of prior art about these particular capabilities that you can learn from. So Core, as I mentioned, is not static, right? This is based on research, just in the same way that American Medical Association guidelines are not static. We want the science to inform us, but we don't want to be whiplashed every year with new findings that may be hard to put into practice. So Core is going to be updated, but it's going to be updated at a slower cadence to the research itself. So the next planned update for Core is in the spring. And to that end, we could use your help. We want to know, as I mentioned, part of what makes it into Core, part of what makes it qualify for Core is that it's been useful to practitioners. So I want to hear from you. Is it working? Does something that we've found in our research not jive with your experience? That's going to have an impact on whether it makes it into Core or not. What can you do with Core? Well, you can use it to guide your experiments and your progress in your journeys. You can link it and embed it and print it. It's available under a Creative Commons license, and you can grab PDFs and pings, print it out, put it up in your wall, cross them off when you're done, and then, of course, you're never done. Go back to them. But I really would love for this to be something that's useful to you as you embark on a transformative journey in your organization. What about all the stuff that's not on Core? Well, let me go back, actually. Things can come back, right? So a great example, something that we've studied in the past at DORA that people really connected to was the notion of transformational leadership. And you'll find an article on this on dora.dev. This is a notion of how leaders can inspire their organization, provide autonomy and direction, and really enforce mission so that everyone in the organization will work together to achieve those organizational goals. This is awesome stuff. Just because it's not in Core right now doesn't mean it's not any good. It's still totally good. But I've heard from a lot of people who say, well, we think it should be in Core. We think it's great. We think it's awesome. The reason it's not is because it doesn't have that validation. We haven't studied it twice. And so the more people complain, I mean feedback, the more likely it is that we're going to bring it in, research it again, and bring it into Core. So that one is definitely high on our list to bring in. Anything else that feels like it belongs in this program, we want to hear from you. So please do contribute. You'll find in our GitHub repo, this is the same repo that publishes our website, there's a discussion. And so if there's something you see in Core that doesn't feel right, something you think is missing, an arrow that's missing the arrowhead that you want to show that you think reflects your experience, please tell us. And our job is to take those hints, those anecdotes, and then bring them into a more rigorous scientific approach so that we can reflect it in this durable artifact. What's next? So we are planning in early 2024 to do an update to Core. This is going to be influenced by 2022 and earlier, but especially it's where we get to bring in things that we've learned in 2023. did you say 2023? Okay, so for those of you who have been following DORA, or for whom this is brand new, but you really just want the newest, hot off the presses, I do want to offer you a few tidbits from what we've learned this year. So here are key insights from 2023. First off, it's new, but it's old, but it's new, healthy culture. We have found more than ever before, we have found in this year of research that a healthy culture is essential to technical and organizational success. And again, by culture, what we mean, the way we measure it is according to that Westrum cultural typology. Ron Westrum, in his work, broke down organizations into 3 types: pathological, bureaucratic, and generative. You can probably guess a little bit by their names which ones are kind of the preferred. Most organizations have a mix of every one. Individuals often display characteristics from all of them, but what their research found, and they were working in contexts like nuclear power plants and hospitals, they found that generative cultures were the most effective. And again, a generative culture is one where information is shared. If new information comes into the organization, we're not going to, quote, shoot the messenger. Instead, we're going to listen to that and say, what can we do about that? What can we learn from that? We've heard already today about learning from incidents, and a culture that's prepared to learn from incidents is going to deliver better outcomes. Our work in DORA has validated that research in the context of software and found that it very much holds through. The second thing, then this is a new one this year, user centricity. We started measuring what we call user centricity. And by that we mean the degree to which an engineering team is anchoring its work on the user, right? How do we listen to users in our work? How do we model them as our success, right? To what extent are we doing our work for the end user as opposed to maybe for an abstract goal or, working towards a metric? We love metrics around here, but they are not a goal. Satisfying the users is the goal. We found that teams that strongly anchor around user centricity deliver 40% greater organizational outcomes as a result. So this user-centric work is really powerful. I certainly found it in my own work as well, that anchoring on the user is so powerful. Documentation. We have a metaphor. We say documentation is like sunshine. We first started exploring this last year and validated it this year. And so documentation, what we mean when we're talking about documentation is that end user document. I'm sorry, I take that back. Not end user documentation. We mean internal documentation. Documentation for the engineers. Documentation that we as engineers build for our colleagues. That stuff where when something's broken, how do I find that run book? What is this library? Why is it even here? It can vary anywhere from code comments to some sort of printed manual and everything in between. We say documentation is like sunshine. And by that what we mean is documentation helps everything else to grow. So all of the other technical capabilities, pretty much all of them, if you have high quality documentation, you will find that all of those other capabilities are dramatically improved. The numbers are like double-digit increases in the success and the value that those things bring because of the documentation. So you'll find that on DORA.dev. What do we mean by good documentation? We actually have some great definitions of that. And it basically means it's easy to use, it's easy to find, it's well maintained. Flexible infrastructure. So we've been looking at cloud infrastructure for a lot of years in DORA. This year we slightly changed how we look at this. For many years we asked about cloud infrastructure, and we found that using cloud is predictive of good organizational outcomes. But this year, we opened that up a little bit. We said, cloud does not necessarily mean flexible, and flexible does not necessarily mean cloud, right? You probably heard cloud is just someone else's data center. Or is it? Or is it a different thing? And this is kind of what we explored. So what we did is we stopped asking people so much if they use cloud, and we asked, tell us about the characteristics of your infrastructure. Does it scale up and down? Does it bin pack? Can I rapidly provision? All of these are inspired by the NIST definition of cloud computing, saying that if you have achieved 5 key characteristics, you'll get the most benefit out of cloud computing. So we wanted to validate that. We also asked people, do you use a cloud provider? Or do you have a private cloud or anything like that? What we found is that flexible infrastructure according to these definitions of being able to scale and be able to bin pack. Flexible infrastructure is strongly predictive of software delivery performance. This stuff does matter, right? Having those auto-scaling groups, having those container orchestrators, all this stuff actually is good for our outcomes. It doesn't have to be coming from a cloud provider, a public cloud provider. Maybe it's on-prem. However, we did find that using a public cloud provider is predictive of achieving flexible infrastructure. So the important thing is the flexible infrastructure. That's what gets you the benefits. A shortcut to that probably is to use the public cloud. Now, the thing about the cloud, though, is you can use the cloud and have it not be flexible. And what we saw is that teams that use a cloud provider but don't achieve that flexible infrastructure, who don't get those actual tangible benefits. If it doesn't feel like cloud, it just happens to be that it's running at a data center that is called a cloud data center. If they're using cloud in that more traditional way, it actually is harmful, hurtful to software delivery performance and organizational performance. So effectively, the takeaway from this is if you take your data center and you take the way you've been operating for years and you just stick it up into the cloud, things actually get worse. We all know it's going to cost more, but it's also going to make your software delivery work worse. So a really important lesson to take away here is that yes, cloud. Cloud is great. As you're moving into the cloud, take the investment to learn how to use it in a flexible way. Otherwise, it's actually going to set you back. And the last finding that I wanted to bring up this year is it's not all happy things that we reveal. This is an important finding that we got to just this year. We looked into the experience of underrepresented groups, and that's a largely self-reported metric of people's own experience of if they are underrepresented, if they identify as someone who's underrepresented. And sadly, in our industry, that can mean a lot of different kinds of identities that are underrepresented in our community. What we found is that people who do identify as underrepresented have much higher levels of burnout than folks who do not identify that way. We also found that those folks who identify that as underrepresented are doing more toil and more work that is unrecognized or less recognized. Sometimes this is called non-promotable tasks. So as an industry, we're finding that people who come from an underrepresented background are doing more of the work that is not healthy work, and as a result, they're suffering from burnout in an unhealthy way. So we've got work to do. Zooming back out, here's the core model. Again, I encourage you to start from the right and work your way left. You can take this to your CIO and say, do you want organizational performance? They probably will say yes. Do you want well-being? I hope they say yes. If they say no, but pretty much everyone will say, I'll take that too. And the good news is we see that these things actually are predictive of each other. In order to get that, we're going to need software delivery performance. This is how a modern organization of any industry really competes and succeeds. We can measure that. We can measure that according to how often are we shipping code to prod? How fast are we getting it there? When we get it there, how often does it blow up and we need to fix it? And when it does, how fast can we fix it? In order to optimize those metrics, one more step to the left and look at the whole catalog, flexible infrastructure, documentation quality, all of these technical capabilities, the pathways that lead them through continuous delivery and generative organizational culture, and streamlining change approval. We didn't touch on this one. It's a huge one. How can we move from a blocking cab that meets once every 2 weeks to a continuous process which maybe says yes by default instead of no by default? By working through these capabilities one at a time, and then again, we're going to improve our software delivery performance and improve both our organizational performance and our own lives at work. So much more is available at DORA.dev. I encourage you to check that out. I'm going to propose an open space about this topic if anyone wants to keep talking about it, so I would love to hear your thoughts. Thank you.